The first guy on the agenda has to be the perennial guy who we have been waiting to come out of college for years.
Yep.
From Alabama, Will Anderson is an absolute beast and easily the most unconventional player in this year's draft, but a guy who is flat out unblockable, it seems like, except the tape we saw last week from Darnell Wright, who had a good game against him, but a guy who is pretty versatile, played as an edge, 3 technique, 4 technique, but the main thing, very accomplished and very productive at the most prestigious college football program in the nation. And Will Anderson.
I mean, Will Anderson, he's one of the best edge rusher prospects we've seen of the past few years, and he's probably the most productive edge rusher that we've seen in college football in a long time. So now the question is, will he be able to translate into the NFL? And based on what we've seen, I think he'll be able to. I mean, he got the technique down. He's got good power. Obviously, we talked about last week how Darnell Wright did not make him look like a top 5 NFL draft pick, and he absolutely dominated him. But the rest of the season, Will Anderson was elite. He was if there weren't elite quarterbacks in this draft, he would be considered for the number 1 overall pick. And I think up until a few weeks ago, there were still possibilities that he could have been the number 1 overall pick. So very interesting to see where he's going to end up, because, we've talked about this a lot, where if Arizona Cardinals trade 3, top 4 picks are going to be quarterbacks. What do the Seahawks do at 5? Do they go Will Anderson? Do they go interior with Jalen Carter? Do they go possibly a cornerback? What do they do? So it's very interesting, but, I mean, he's a top 5 level talent, no question about it.
Yeah. And the other thing also about Will Anderson that you think about in terms of his NFL success and his NFL potential, he's being compared to DeMarcus Ware.
Yep.
A Hall of Fame Super Bowl winning player from the Denver Broncos, was with the Dallas Cowboys as well. So when we're comparing a guy immediately out of the gate coming into this draft to a Hall of Fame Super Bowl winning defensive end who is a playmaker and a difference maker for 2 very good franchises and a staple on those 2 defenses, that shows the impact that Will Anderson is potentially going to bring to a team, even in year 1, right out of the gate this fall.
Yeah. And, last year, I remember we were talking about who's going to be the number 1 overall pick between Aiden Hutchinson and Trayvon Walker. I mean, Will Anderson would have been the number 1 overall pick, I think, pretty handily if he came out in the same year as them. So it just kind of shows. And Aiden Hutchinson had a very, very good rookie year. Trayvon Walker, very underrated rookie year. I mean, it just shows the levels that there are between who's maybe the 5th overall pick and 2 people that were going for the number 1 overall pick last year. So, interesting.
Yeah, I think he's definitely the best pass rushing prospect we've seen since, I would say, Myles Garrett. You talked about recent memory. I think Myles Garrett is the one who can come close to rivaling him, which just says a lot about his game. But I talked about the versatility of him, on the defensive line. We'll talk about the stats here. So a guy who, productive and versatile. 14 sacks in 13 games in 2022 with 42 hurries this season. Last year he had 15 and 15 with 56 hurries. But in terms of the snap count, 125 snaps over the tackle, 524 outside of the tackle, and then 9 off the ball. So a very much on the line player. Right outside the tackle was his forte. The same thing was in 2021. He had 691 snaps outside the tackle, on the line of scrimmage. So that's where we're going to see him play. And the bulk of his movement is a speed to power rush. Not a bendy guy, not a flashy guy with the spin moves, the different arsenal moves, the chops, anything like that. He's just speed, straight into power on the tackle, and bull rush him back into the quarterback.
Yeah, and I mean, he's very good at what he does. And so the one thing is, he does that so well. He may need to adapt a little bit, though, at the NFL level and kind of broaden his abilities. Because we'll talk about this again, but Darnell Wright, good length, strong power, he had difficulty with that. And Darnell Wright, we're talking as possibly a late first-round pick. So you're thinking about this. Once you get to the NFL level and you got a player that's similar to Darnell Wright's capability, but at the more elite level, it'll be interesting to see how Will Anderson plays against them. And we won't know until he gets to the NFL level and actually plays those kind of guys. But I think I think he'll be fine either way, but it'll be interesting to see if he has to adapt his game just a little bit to kind of broaden his style of play a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So let's pull up the film now and see some of this power rush move that he really liked to implement, and then see where we can implement maybe in his game some more twists and stunts to get some more sack production at the next level against some of these top caliber tackles. So what we're watching is he's moving around the formation a lot. On that defensive front, sometimes he's on the left side, sometimes he's on the right side, but every time he's right off the tackle on the line of scrimmage, like I talked about, right outside of him. But his initial speed is insane to me. Right off the snap, just the acceleration straight into the backfield and the power pushing people back over and over again, just slamming guys on the ground was really fun to watch as I was putting this together.
Yeah, I mean, just watching him get off the line, it's overwhelming for most tackles that you're going to face. So just that little ability to just jump right away and go straight into just pure speed and power, I mean, it's unheard of. So it's something that, when he gets to the league, people are going to be watching for that. So I'm excited to kind of see him go up against some of these top-level tackles in the NFL, because there are going to be some battles. There are going to be some good battles over the next few weeks, and I'm excited to see if the NFL tackles are going to be able to handle it, honestly.
And another underrated part of his game that's going to have to be something you consider if you're an NFL offensive coordinator preparing for this guy every week, the outside zone offenses. When they're running away from Will Anderson, like we saw some of the plays where he's, if you're looking at the defense, he was on the left side and they're running an outside zone to the right. They're pulling the tackle away from Will Anderson, leaving him unblocked, which is what you do in an outside zone scheme. But Will Anderson has that such quick acceleration off the line of scrimmage.
His pursuit speed is insane.
Yeah, he's running down running backs and tackling them on the other side of the front behind the line of scrimmage.
Yep.
So that is an underrated part of his game that some offensive coordinators will have to prepare for, is if they're running an outside zone, they might be more likely to run it towards Will Anderson with a double team as opposed to leaving him unblocked and running it away from him.
Yeah, and I mean, that's something that NFL teams are going to have to adapt to. And if they are unable to, I mean, here's the thing. I think in the first 2 or 3 games of the season, they're going to run their offenses like they usually do. And I think they might run away from him. He's going to show them that they can't do that against him, and it's going to change. So I think the first 2 or 3 weeks of Will Anderson's career, I think the tackle for loss category could be very high, and then we'll see it kind of downgrade over the next few weeks. But I mean, that's a very underrated part of the game, as you mentioned, and he should see success there.
All right, so looking at the draft board, Matt, this guy, he looks like a top prospect.
Yep.
He looks like a surefire, top 3 pick, but with 2 quarterbacks expected to go 1 and 2.
Yep.
The Cardinals fielding trade offers for 3. You talked about Seattle at 5 as a top landing spot. The Cardinals, if they stay there, Will Anderson makes sense. If they can't find a trade partner to trade back from, but what I want to see madness. The closer we get to the draft, I want to see absolute madness where Bryce Young potentially goes 1, and the Texans don't like C.J. Stroud enough to take him at 2, and they take Will Anderson. I think he could be the 2nd overall pick in this year's class if we're talking about absolute madness starting off the draft next Thursday. I
mean, I don't know how likely that is. I don't know how likely it is, just because I don't think the Texans want to run it back without a new quarterback
Well,
this
they
year.
still have the 12th overall pick. You can trade back up.
Yeah,
that's my mindset now.
Yeah,
if Bryce Young goes first is the thing.
If Bryce Young goes first, yeah. I mean, it's interesting. And, I was just looking. The rest of the QB visits are happening over the next 3 days. I mean, there's also Anthony Richardson. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see if, say Texans' number 1 quarterback is Bryce Young. Do they see another quarterback do they need to draft quarterback? Do they need to? That's going to be the question. And, I mean, we're going to talk about this a lot. There is a lot of depth at this edge position. Do they feel like they need to get Will Anderson at 2 when, if they're at 12 or move up from 12, they can get a Tyree Wilson, Lucas Van Ness, Nolan Smith, someone like that. But that would be madness. I mean, if we're all saying the top 4 picks could be quarterbacks, and then all of a sudden number 2 becomes Will Anderson, draft boards, scouting rooms go crazy. they don't know what to do anymore. Their quarterback might be available that they didn't think was going to be available at the time. Everything goes complete draft day, and it messes everything. It'll be fun if that happens.
Yeah, there's a fantastic podcast on the Athletic Football Show where they did a mock draft this weekend, and Lance Zierlein made that decision at the second overall pick and took Will Anderson, instead of taking C.J. Stroud, and the rest of the board was insanity.
Yep.
I was listening to it thinking, how are guys still on the board as I was driving and listening to it, and I remembered it all goes back to the fact that Will Anderson went second overall, and it completely shot up the entire board.
Here's the thing, I mean, it just puts into question everything. I mean, you go in and you see C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young. Everybody's like, those are the top 2 picks in this NFL draft. It's going to happen. Both teams need quarterbacks, and they're going to do it. That's what's going to happen. One of those guys doesn't happen. I mean, it puts questions into everybody's mind. All of a sudden, if this scenario would happen, C.J. Stroud starts slipping. All of a sudden, C.J. Stroud's available at 10, and someone trades up into 10 and gets C.J. Stroud at 10 in an incredible value. That's why I love the NFL draft, just because crazy things can happen, and Will Anderson could cause chaos if that were to happen.
So an interesting landing spot, but for sure within the top 5.
Yeah,
seems like Will Anderson.
I think it would be very, very unlikely if he gets to the Seahawks that they pass up on him. I just think, the only player that could possibly go there would be Jalen Carter, but I think Will Anderson probably gets that spot.